Today, we're blending rocks. Oh, not with this. We're blending rocks into one another and into our scenery base on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things. If you'd like to see more videos about model railroading tips, tools, and techniques, then be sure and subscribe down below and hit that bell icon so you won't miss a single episode. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video on casting and placing plaster rocks on your layout. After that video, I was asked some questions about how I blend my rocks into the surrounding scenery so it doesn't look like they're just glued or plopped onto the scenery. I realized after those questions that that was a step that I had skipped in making that video, so I want to go back and cover that today. Today I'm going to show you a location on my layout where I didn't cast the rocks in place, but rather I am literally gluing them in place, and then I'm going to show you how I blend them together and blend them into the surrounding scenery to make them look like a natural rock outcropping. Hopefully this will clear up some of those questions left by my previous video. Before we get to that, I do want to take just a moment to remind you that voting is still open and going on for the Big Build Contest sponsored by Eric Hall and his channel, IMRROCom. I'm going to put a link one more time down in the description of this video. If you haven't yet voted, I hope that you'll go and take a look at all of the videos from the contestants who entered the Big Build Contest and vote for your favorite. So be sure and check that description down below and go vote. Now let's get over to the layout and look at blending some rocks today. First, I want to show you what's possible in the area of blending rocks together and blending them into the scenery. In this particular shot, you're seeing three different kinds of rock castings. This here is a plaster rock casting made with hydrocal. This area is made with rubber rock castings. And this other area that's not quite as finely detailed is made with a rock foil material. As you can see, with some plaster, some paint, and some work, you can blend all three of these different kinds of rocks together fairly successfully. The foil is not as detailed at all, but it's going to go behind this waterfall. This is a mock-up of the waterfall that I'm planning for this area. And you see that once that waterfall is in place, these different kinds of rocks are going to blend together very, very nicely. So let me show you how I blend my rocks together. I'm going to be gluing on some precast rocks using a DAP latex caulk. I've prepared the scenery base here in much the same way as I did in the video that I shared several weeks ago with a web of cardboard and hard shell plaster made with plaster soaked paper towels and then plaster of Paris. I take some time to figure out exactly how I want to position my precast rocks, and then I glue them in place with the latex caulk, making sure to get them positioned tightly enough that I can easily fill in the spaces between them as I blend them together. But I also want to position them in such a way that they look the most natural together, so it'll be easier to actually blend the rocks together. Once these are in place, I need to let this caulk dry for at least several hours, preferably for 24 hours, to make sure that these are solidly in place before I start the process of blending them. I'm going to be blending them with hydrocal plaster, so the first step is going to be to mist the plaster base and the rocks that are in place with a little bit of water. That will help keep my plaster from drying out too quickly and will actually help it to stick better in the long run. I'm going to mix my hydrocal very thick, almost the consistency of a modeling clay, as you see here. And then I'm going to take my gloves and I'm going to just start pushing and working it into the cracks between the rocks, as well as the gaps around the outside of the rocks where they meet the scenery base. I want to try to work as much of the plaster material into the cracks as I can. At the same time, I don't want to use so much plaster on these rock castings that I completely obliterate the detail that's already there from the moldings that I made the castings from. Just using my fingers to work this material in. I only have about 5 minutes working time at best with this thick plaster material, so you want to work in a small area, and you also want to be able to do the next steps in this process while this plaster is still soft, so you don't want to try to do too much at a time. or you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. Once the plaster is in place, I'm going to use a hobby knife with a number 17 blade in it, and I'm going to start to carve the new plaster material. The first thing I'm going to do is go and clean up some of the large, chunky looking spots and some of the ridges that are left from my putting this plaster in place. And at the same time, I'm going to use this blade to try to pick some of this new plaster out of the detail from the rock moldings. The more detail I can save from the rock castings themselves, the less work I'll have to do to try to recreate the look of the rock in those areas. Once I'm satisfied with all of the plaster that I can possibly get out of the rock casting detail, I'm going to start picking and carving at the surface of the new plaster itself. I use the edge of my blade to score some lines both vertically and horizontally in the plaster. I like to do this, especially as you see here, try to extend the lines that are already in the rock castings themselves, where they come together, or the cracks and crevices that are part of the rock casting. Try to extend those into the plaster that I've added in between and surrounding these rocks. Gives a more natural appearance. After I've done quite a bit of scoring, both horizontally and vertically, then I just start to take my blade and kind of pick and twist at the soft plaster. Try to break and flake off little bits of the surface. That's what's going to give you the most realistic rock detail look to this plaster that we have put in between and around these rocks. I want to completely chip away the fresh, smooth surface that comes about from my pushing this plaster in between these rocks to give it all a textured and broken up kind of weathered rock look. And the more I can work at it while the plaster is still fairly soft with this number 17 blade, the more realistic my rock casting is going to look. The more they're going to blend together naturally. I periodically take a soft brush just to brush away the chips, and use a shop vac to vacuum up the chips that are left behind so I can see my work. And here's a look at the rock after I've carved it the way that I like it. Once I've got it to where I want it, then I paint it as much as I did in my previous video with a base coat of a light gray, and then I stain it to give it some texture with India ink and alcohol. Then I use my semi-dry brushing technique with the color. In this case, I'm using still that very red color representing rocks in North Texas, and just a little bit of a kind of yellowish color to give it some definition and to give it a little bit of texture. I want to let that paint dry completely before I do the next step on my rocks. In the meantime, I'm going to go around and paint the earth color around my rocks. In this case, North Texas, I'm using a very red kind of an earth color. And then once everything is dry, I'm going to come back and use a real dry brushing technique to dry brush just a little bit of white highlight on to give some sun highlights to the rocks themselves. And then I'm going to paint the ground area, the earth area, with diluted white glue and sprinkle it with my favorite ground cover. And you see, I get a nicely blended rock. These rocks blend very naturally into the scenery around them and into one another, give a very natural look. This is not a finished scene, but it definitely gives me something nice to work with as I go forward. Well, I hope that answers any questions you had after my recent rock casting video. I think if you follow these techniques, you'll find that whether you cast your rocks in place or whether you glue them on as a separate step, you can blend them together and blend them into the surrounding scenery in such a way that it makes them look not only natural, but very realistic. So I hope you'll give these techniques a try. I want to thank you for joining me on Ron's Trains and Things today. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up down below. Also, be sure and share this video on your social media or model railroad forums that you participate in so others can enjoy this and other episodes of Ron's Trains and Things. If you're new to my channel, be sure and check out my other great videos on model railroading. I'm sure you'll find some other helpful videos there. Also, be sure and leave a comment or a question down in that comment section at the bottom of the page. This entire video came about as a result of some of the comments that some of my viewers left. So be sure and ask your questions, leave your comments about this video, and about things that you might like to see in future episodes of Ron's Trains and Things. They'll be helpful to me, and I promise I always read your comments and I always respond. Finally, check out that expanded description right down below this video. There you'll find that link where you can vote in the Big Build contest, as well as my Amazon pick of the day. You might find something you're interested in there. Also, there's information there about my layout, the Texas, Colorado, and Western, the Facebook page that I keep dedicated to it, and ways that you can help support Ron's Trains and Things through my Patreon or PayPal Me accounts. That's all I have for this installment, but you'll want to join me again this Friday as I bring you another Feature Friday segment featuring a model railroad museum from my recent trip to Hannibal, Missouri. There's an interesting story behind this museum, and I know that you'll enjoy it. So be sure and tune in on Friday, and I look forward to seeing you then.